Good evening. Am I on? Okay. Good evening and welcome everyone. This is Raac's 28th annual No Ordinary Person show. And I want to ask, did you all get a chance to read the article in the Rap News yesterday? I want a big shout out and kudos to Ireland Hayes. What a gorgeous job of researching, interviewing, and writing. And if you read that, you understand why we do this, where the whole idea came from, why we think this unique Rappahannock tradition is worth continuing. And I actually think in times when divisiveness and disconnection seem to be growing by leaps and bounds, that sharing our personal stories may actually be a key to our salvation, maybe even our survival. As many of you know, this whole tradition really goes back to Julie Portman and the Life Stories workshop she offered here in the county starting back in the late 1990s. Joyce Abel attended her very first workshop, and afterwards she said, "Oh my God, these are such great stories. We have to find some way to share them with a broader audience." So Joyce launched No Ordinary Person in 1997 and directed the show for more than 2 decades. And as you may know, the inimitable Joyce just celebrated her 100th birthday. She actually found storytellers, she helped them write and edit their stories, she helped coach them. So if she hadn't done all that, we wouldn't be here talking about any of this. I think, we're hoping that some of you listening tonight may be inspired to tell your own stories at some point in the future. And I would say this to you: they don't have to be stories of high drama. They may be, but they don't have to be. And you don't have to be a seasoned stage performer or a public speaker. All you have to do is be willing to share a small piece of yourself. Maybe capture a moment when your worldview just shifted a little bit, or maybe you learned something about yourself. If you decide you're interested, please reach out to us. Our coaching team, Lynn and Ed Dolnick and Dick Rains and I, would be delighted to hear from you, to listen, and to help. Tonight, we're going to hear from 4 Rappahannock residents in the order that was listed in your program. First is Philip Ward, who is going to explore trust and the path he took to become an artist. Monica Kelly is going to take us to Nepal on a trek to Mount Everest Base Camp. Lily Strange is going to take us to a secret and healing place right here in the woods of Rappahannock. And John Fox Sullivan is going to introduce us to his 9-year-old self and explore how that little boy and the things that happened to him may have impacted things later in his life. So before we start, I want to give you a couple of housekeeping things. As you probably know, there are 2 exits, one here on your right, one where you came in. We are not going to have an intermission tonight, but if you need restrooms, they're through the lobby and to the right. I do want to tell you that one of the special things that we've started doing the last couple of years after No Ordinary Person is a brief talk back. So after John tells his story, if you give us just a few minutes to rearrange chairs here, we're going to have a brief talk back moderated by Ed Dolnick, something like 15 minutes. So we hope you all will stay for that too. I would also point out on the back of your program, there's some items about upcoming Raac events, including the summer concert series, free concerts in Sperryville on the 3rd Thursday of the month. And the community theater is delighted to announce that our next show will be Always Patsy Cline. And it's going to be fabulous, lots of great music, the Nether's Hot Club will be playing, and that will be the last 2 weeks in September, so keep that in mind. So in the article in the paper, Miranda Hope was quoted as saying that listening is an act of love. So let's all give tons of love to our 4 storytellers tonight.
I am originally from Yorkshire, in the northeast of England, but I've lived in Virginia since 1982. First on Virginia's eastern shore, in Locustville, which of course is named after the tree, not the insect, as I had to remind my Welsh and Yorkshire relatives. And then since 2007, I've lived here in Rappahannock, in Slate Mills. I was born in Goole, a small town built at the confluence of 2 rivers where the Roman and later the Viking invasion fleets landed. I grew up in brand new government housing built shortly after World War II. There seemed to be 2.4 children in almost every house. I was with my older brother in ours. My father was a train driver and my mother made desserts at a local restaurant. All of us kids commandeered our wide, brand new tree-lined street as our playground. We were the Western Roaders, rivals of the Cobbler Hill mob around the corner. There was very little traffic on Western Road back then, a couple of buses a day and the occasional truck delivering coal or groceries. And in the summer, an ice cream van came jangling round. I can remember the first car parked on our street when I was 12 years old. Someone's older brother came home from university in a clapped-out Ford. Whenever I was not outside with all the other kids playing in our street or in the surrounding woods and fields, I spent a good deal of time drawing and painting. There were no paintings on the walls of our house until I started. My father came home with out-of-date wallpaper sample books for me to use. The paper was thick and heavy. Painting over pre-existing patterns and images gave me ideas for how my own pictures could possibly proceed. Actually, a method I still occasionally use today. My proclivity for painting was recognized and noted at school. In 4th grade at Kingsway Primary School, Thursday afternoon meant music with Mr. Millward. Well, actually, it meant singing with Mr. Millward. That first Thursday afternoon, we were all belting out all things bright and beautiful as Mr. Millward moved along the row, his head tilted to one side, as he listened intently to each voice. If he tapped you on the shoulder with his finger, it meant mime from now on. He tapped me on the shoulder. The following Thursday afternoon, trying to mime, I was still putting off the people around me so badly that Millie, for that's what we called him, Millie said, "Go back to the classroom and paint." All that year, I had the classroom to myself for the entire afternoon. Sometimes Millie set me subjects, but mostly I could paint whatever I wanted, frequently trains and horses. At the age of 11, we were all divided up and assigned either to the grammar school or the modern school. The grammar school was theoretically for the top 22% most academically gifted students from all the schools in town and for 40 miles around. It offered a route to university at the age of 18. The modern school offered technical and vocational courses up to the age of 16. I was sent to the grammar school, a 3-story red brick building built on an almost symmetrical E-shaped plan. As a freshman, it took a while to learn which rooms were where and to acquire the nicknames of the teachers, which were handed down to us like heirlooms, though now of completely obscure origin. There was Chopper, Boiler, Tacky, Elvis, Bongo, Mildred, Test Tube and Festus, for example. Clearly, many of these teachers had been at the school for some years. It was a very good school. Most of the teachers had master's degrees in their subjects. Some had PhDs. But in addition to these traditions, the school was also dominated by a ferocious Scottish art master, Mr. D.C. Turner, Mr. David Charles Turner, inevitably known as Angus. Each of the teachers had to take an occasional turn quieting the rowdy hordes before morning assembly each day, some with more success than others. Whenever it was Angus's turn, he would quietly enter from the rear of the assembly hall, utter a single sibilant Scottish "shucked," and there would be instant and total silence from 800 students. Angus would then turn on his heel and disappear upstairs for a smoke, quite against school rules, but the silence remained. The silence remained because another lesson we inherited was do not mess with Angus. Angus was a formidable improviser who rarely used the standard methods of maintaining order. A cavalier youth, 14 years old, showing off to his mates, had spoken out of turn. Instead of offering the Saturday morning detention he could have used, Angus told the smirking culprit to stand on his chair and recite, "Mary had a little lamb." As he reluctantly began, Angus paced the room, flicking chalk, blackboard erasers, drawing pins, paper clips, and spent matches at the offender, who struggled to the end of his humiliating recital and began to sit down. "Stay right where you are, laddie. Right, that was no bad, but now, this next time, I want to hear a wee bit more emotion, Painty. Think of the poor lost lamb and pity the poor wee lassie. Right, away you go again now, louder, louder." Oh, no, you did not want to mess with Angus. The entire third floor of the school was given over to 2 enormous art rooms, which both featured large north-facing windows looking out over the rugby pitches far below. This was Angus's eyrie. Over the years, Angus had brilliantly husbanded his resources in order to create an art supply storeroom worthy of Fort Knox, worthy because of the treasures within, and worthy because of the difficulty of access and entry. Angus held the only key. In their first 2 years at the school, no student ever received a piece of paper to paint on that didn't already have someone else's work on the back. But in 10th grade, art was an elective subject, and it was for those students who had chosen art that Angus had accumulated these supplies. If you chose art as an advanced class, unlimited materials now became available, and 1/3 of the art room became part of your personal domain. Privileges devised by Angus. You had your own easel and workplace permanently set up. You could leave your paints and current work in place while you attended your other classes, and then return to painting in the studio straight away. One day, I returned to my easel to find that Angus had corrected my work in my absence. It was a painting of war-damaged tenement housing down by the docks. The front of the building had collapsed, and looking up the staircase, you could see the different wall colours and the various wallpaper left behind by the tenants. Angus had corrected the perspective of the metal handrail and newel post at the foot of the stairs. But what I had painted was the damaged and distorted handrail and newel post as they had survived. I immediately decided to paint over Angus's corrections. I had been doing this for a little while as I gradually became aware that the resounding silence in the room had somehow grown more acute. And turning round, I found Angus standing right behind me and the entire studio holding its breath. "What do you think you're doing, laddie?" I managed to say I was putting my painting back the way I wanted it. Angus chuckled. "Oh, you are, yeah?" It seemed as if several hours must have crept by very, very slowly before Angus spoke again. "Right, laddie, carry on, carry on." And I could breathe again. After that, Angus really became a mentor to me. The next day when I appeared in the art room, Angus emerged from Fort Knox to show me illustrations of paintings by Pietro and Ambrosio Lorenzetti. I'd never heard of them, but there began my admiration for 14th and 15th century Sienese painting that endures to this day. Because of my stubbornness in insisting on my version of the staircase painting, over the next weeks and months, Angus encouraged me to trust my intuition, to trust my judgment, to trust myself when it came to my own work. I saw how amused Angus was by his fierce reputation, because actually he was a subtle and thoughtful teacher. His criticisms and advice were always constructive and perceptive. Angus encouraged each of his students to be true to themselves in what they chose to do and how they chose to do it. If you made even a small commitment to art, Angus made a commitment to you. At the beginning, in the second week of my senior year, I arrived at school on the Monday morning to hear the terrible news that Angus had suddenly died over the weekend. The entire school, the entire town was deeply shocked. The advanced art class was completely struck dumb. It was a very hard blow. It was as if we were all emotionally blank and numb. Getting through the year ourselves and putting ourselves through those final art exams was the only way that we could begin to acknowledge the loss of Angus. I had already decided to apply to art college, but which one and with what kind of a portfolio I would now have to determine on my own. Deciding to apply to colleges in cities I had never visited seemed straightforward, but I was surprised and baffled to be asked in interviews what my parents thought of me attending art college. All I had ever known was the complete support and backing from my parents for whatever I chose to do. My parents fully accepted my interest in art, even though there was no precedent for art in our family. When I went to the grammar school, my mother told me I now had educational opportunities that had been denied to them. Both of my parents left school at the age of 14 in the 1930s depression. To begin with, there were only 4 books in our house. But my mother introduced me to the town library and taught me to read and write, even before I started school at the age of 4. When I was 12, my father told me they probably wouldn't be able to help me scholastically, but they had complete trust in me to always do my very best, honestly and fairly. But it would be up to me. In my 7 years at the school, my parents never once asked me about my homework, but they closely monitored my progress by thoroughly questioning my teachers at every PTA meeting. My gratitude to my parents for giving me their trust in this way has only grown more profound as I have become older. Seeing my friends and relations raise children of their own, it seems to me that trust is one of the greatest gifts that parents can bestow upon their children. Just like parental birds encouraging their young to fledge and leave the nest, it takes courage to send your offspring out into the world, trusting that they will fly, trusting that they will experience the world with good judgment, and occasionally return to the parents to share new knowledge. Similarly, when you find your partner, the trust you give and the trust you receive are large and marvelous parts of the love you share. Angus taught me to trust myself in art. My parents taught that their trust in me was complete, permanent, and unconditional. Being with Linda for the last 44 wonderful years only reaffirms that the life we share is firmly based on trust. There is trust involved in occasions like this evening. You, the audience, trust that you will be entertained or amused, possibly even enlightened. And the storytellers up here on the stage trust that they will be given a fair hearing and responded to accordingly. Trust is how we build community, and trust is why we are all here this evening. Thank you.
I thought I was going to die. Have you ever had that thought? The fear, the adrenaline, the lack of breath, or maybe there wasn't enough time to think that maybe this was your last day on earth. Well, it happened to me. It was October 6th, 2019, as I was trekking to Mount Everest Base Camp. At that time in my life, all I wanted to do was just learn how to publish my first book. But I ended up here in Nepal, witnessing God's art on the other side of the earth, seeing the magnificent Himalayas. How and why did I end up here? Maybe that's the thought that you're having. Well, oddly, it began with the book. So, writing a book in and of itself is a mountainous goal. Would you agree? So I went to this free workshop in Warrenton where 12 of us future authors listened to Marianne Clyde tell us how to go about publishing a book, since she had published 2 by then. When I found out that she too lived here in Rappahannock, I asked her if she would meet me for more publishing how-tos. And by the end of that meeting, she reminded me that I didn't respond to her invite to an event that she sent to me via Facebook. Yeah, I said, what was that? It looked like a Star Wars odd picture of this woman on top of a snow peak. I wasn't sure. She explained it was a fundraiser for World Hope International, a climb for a cause, a trek to Nepal to raise awareness and funds for clean water globally. And then we parted ways. When I got home, Mike, my husband, he asked, how did it go? When I relayed the great publishing advice, he nodded and he smiled. But when I mentioned this invite to climb for a cause, to go to Mount Everest Base Camp later that year, his eyes opened wide, his jaw dropped, and he exclaimed, really? I've always wanted to go to Everest. It was like he was a little kid on Christmas, full of such joy, as if this invite to base camp was the best gift ever. At first, I cast this aside and I respond, Mike, can't we just go someplace warm? But after going on YouTube and seeing this, what exactly is this videos, I began to get excited too. Remember, I just wanted to publish my first book. But life is full of this way and that way, and one thing leads to another, right? Why should this path to becoming a published author exclude an adventure with my beloved to the most amazing mountains on the other side of the world? Well, it took about 3 months before we fully committed to saying yes to this fundraiser invite. Lots to discover, lots to uncover, lots to research, and, my friends, seriously consider. The reality of the risks involved hit me when we had our wills drawn up. I shared the news and some of the videos with my 3 children who were nearly done with college at that point, and they were mostly excited for this undertaking. So next, it was time to train for this adventure. 6 months away, plenty of time, but not plenty of altitude to train around here. So truly, you can't train for elevation change other than maybe going out west to the 14,000-foot Rockies, you know? And our schedule didn't allow that. So instead, every Sunday, we hiked here, our very own trails in Rappahannock. By the way, these mountains, though they don't exceed 5,000 feet above sea level, do you know they're over 2 billion years old, not like our young 40 to 50 million year old Himalayans? So we began training with 2-mile hikes. We carried light loads. Then gradually we added weight and distance, like any training for a marathon of life. As a fitness instructor, personal trainer, and yoga teacher, I used the skills that I knew along the way, along with my life coaching tools of affirmations, that I can do this. Tools I would include in my soon-to-be published book. So I used the local trails behind the wharf. I changed up my pace, my incline, my decline. I added weight. I even changed up the steps. I went sideways. I went backwards. I did grapevining. And so I was really ready as I could be. Mike walks miles each day as a mail carrier, so it was just the elevation that we really couldn't train for. We could, however, get the altitude sickness prevention meds needed just in case. Ooh, altitude, that's a whole nother beast. Lack of oxygen puts pressure on your brain, and altitude sickness can be so bad that you cannot continue at that point on Everest. A helicopter has to come and get you, and you need special insurance just in case that happens. There are no vehicles on the trek, just big yaks that come carrying with all the goods and supplies, and then there's some strong locals hired to bear weight on their bodies to get supplies to the tea houses, or helicopters, yes, and donkeys. One of the gals in our group had an injured foot, and so they attempted to get a donkey to take her the rest of the way. But she ended up being helicoptered down to a hospital in the city of Kathmandu, a fate I hoped to avoid. But before we could start climbing, the first hurdle that we had was getting into Lukla Airport. Videos of this airport were at the top of my reasons not to do this list, as that airport is known as the most dangerous in the world. At 9,300 feet, it has a steep runway, cliffs at both ends. Weather is unpredictable, and aircraft instrumentation lacks modern equipment. Meaning, if pilots can't see, we don't fly. And so, on the day that we were to fly into Lukla, we were indeed grounded by weather conditions, knowing that if we were delayed too long, the whole trek might be off. This possibility made me sad, as I truly, truly wanted to make it there. While we were grounded, Raju, our guide, he knew people in the nearby village. So we were lucky enough to stay overnight at an interesting hostel kind of motel. We got fed, we had showers. Well, the next day, we hoped for the best. By this time, there were many other people grounded, but it was first come, first serve. In the morning, thankfully, the sky was clear, so we could take off for Lukla. Day one of our official trek was about to begin, though we would have to increase the pace of our daily climb to make up for the lost time. You know, one person I know, hearing that we were hiking to the base camp, dismissed this as nothing, since we weren't climbing to the 29,000-foot summit, just the base camp. True, we would not be scaling ice walls and traversing crevasses in the rarefied air at the very top. But base camp is at 17,600 feet, and altitude sickness can kick in many of thousands of feet below that, not to mention all of those challenges along the way. For instance, the second thing on my reasons not to do this list, we would have to traverse up and over 9 suspension bridges, some as high as 60 feet above the fast-flowing glacial river, both up and back to and from base camp. I asked Marianne, hey, have you seen these videos of the suspension bridges? What? I'm afraid of heights. I didn't see those. I truly think that was her reply. She was just focused on the bigger picture here, the cause. Well, then there was more obstacles to my saying yes. There were non-heated tea houses along the way where we would stay overnight. The occasional potty hole-in-the-ground situation. No flushing toilets. No showers unless you purchased a bucket of hot water for $5. No Wi-Fi until you paid $5 for it at each tea house, if they had it. Tap water, not safe, but we purchased boiled water each night and slept with these REI bottles in our sleeping bags to keep warm, and then, ta-da! The next day we were ready with our drinking water for the day's trek. It's amazing how we all adapt to live without certain comforts. Oh, and What about my book? Will this trek add to it, or will it cause me to procrastinate when it comes to finishing? Bringing my journal was a must. And at that time, all I knew about my manuscript was about my 108 method, the 108 method, a system of workouts and breath techniques that I created based on the sacred number 108. After each exhausting day of hiking, I used my journal to record what had happened that day and to jot down ideas to flesh out the book's outline. On October 6th, the 6th day of the climb, I woke up feeling cold, tired, but eager to continue, never imagining what would happen next. By then, we were at 16,000 feet, and with each step, I felt slower and slower. As I struggled to keep up with the group, I felt like I had a 2-ton elephant sitting on my chest. My heart was racing. It felt as if I was walking through molasses. This was tough with a capital T. As it got harder and harder to breathe, I wanted to cry, but I didn't even have the breath to get it out. I began to panic fast. Not being able to breathe felt like this was it. You know, one of the things that I've always taught my students is to listen to their body before it screams at you. And at that moment of panic, mine was telling me, screaming at me, to stop right there. So I stopped. I told Raju, I have to heed my own advice and I have to take a break. I was feeling embarrassed that I was the one holding up the group. The dread of having to be helicoptered out loomed. And then as my breathing and my panic calmed a bit, our lead coach in the group, Sarah, a seasoned mountain climber and athlete, she came up to me gently and she said, "It does you no good to keep telling yourself that you can't do this. Instead," she said, "picture something at base camp that will motivate you to keep going." As a coach myself, I knew this, but I needed a coach at that moment. So I began to visualize one clear, positive vision to help overcome fear of this happening again. I imagined that if I was able to reach the base camp, I would be greeted by a welcoming committee. I saw Jesus, I saw Buddha, and I saw my mom and dad. They were waiting for me there in lounge chairs, and they were drinking martinis. Yes, the power of the mind shifted my state of I can't to yes, I can, and I will. The next day, when breathing continued to be difficult, I pictured that welcoming committee. I smiled, and then I walked on, one breath at a time, one step at a time. As I walked alongside our very experienced trek guide that morning, I asked Raju if he had ever witnessed an avalanche. When moments later, I kid you not, one appeared right on cue in the distance. We were all stopped dead in our tracks. And as I watched and videoed the ripple of snow and ice fall in the distance, I was reminded of the risks that we were all taking and realized that our team still had many more steps to take to reach base camp at 17,600 feet. Hopefully, that was the first and only avalanche that we would encounter. About an hour or so later, there we were, our Climb for a Cause team and many others at base camp on that day. It was October 9th, 2019. It was cold, it was windy, but it was oh so amazing to see the summit of the highest mountain on this planet. It was a clear day, luckily for us. My feet were tired, my throat was sore, but I managed to take my gloves off and film a video of Raju dancing in the background. We made it! Being open to whatever it takes is how I lead my life and also continue to coach my clients up and over their own mountains. On the Everest trek, I truly remembered to practice what I preach, to take one breath at a time and to listen to my body, to appreciate the infinite potential of awe and wonder. Base camp was never on my bucket list, but it gave me the gift of wanting more. And my life continues to be full of adventures. And little did I know that saying yes to this Climb for a Cause would also add depth to the book that I was writing, which has indeed been published under the title, Open Your Presence, a simple method to find calm in chaos. As I practice yoga daily, every time I stand tall in mountain pose, from my own base camp feet to the summit top of my head, I am reminded of that standing at that base camp moment, seeing the summit as she is kissing the sky. That majestic mountain touches that blue sky. I feel the mountain's incredible power. But I also feel my own. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. In the winter of 2023, I became so sick I felt almost foreign to myself. Days, then weeks, then 2 months, in and out of bed, gave me too much time to think about too much. First, I got COVID, and then the flu. And this was not like the baby flu. This flu was mean. I'd sweat through my clothes. I was left exhausted, dehydrated, and at times delirious. I even thought I saw a lion at the bottom of the stairs. It was brutal. And in my state of weakness, and with all the lions, my brain followed my body into the dark. And then I turned 40. I was still sick, and my friends would leave gifts outside my house, like I had the plague, or bring them to my husband's work. I couldn't even taste my own birthday cake. Over very slow moving time, I started to feel better. But my brain was slower to catch up. I was stuck. I needed a win. I asked for a higher power. I put it out to the universe. I prayed for a sign, a distraction, something to unstick me. So, as soon as I could drive, I bought an undisclosed amount of lottery tickets. I mean, I knew the odds were not in my favor, but didn't the universe sort of owe me something? I mean, wasn't I finally due for some good luck? But to my actual surprise, I did not win a single dollar. I sincerely could not believe it. Oh, I'd have to rely on another kind of green, the woods. So as soon as I could walk any real distance, I went. The woods have been good to me, with the exception of poison ivy and Lyme disease. But they're usually good, and they usually deliver. I wasn't expecting anything tangible from the woods, just some woods therapy, maybe some clarity, some direction, maybe revelation. And I quickly got lost in thought, looking for a sign, a distraction, trying to read every bird call or fallen tree as a meaningful message. Having lost track of time and realizing the sun was setting, I had to take a shortcut to the scrubbier part of the forest. Within minutes, there it was, my sign. It was a rock. But a rock with sparkling teeth, little crystal teeth, a vein of crystals in the rock. I felt euphoric. I felt giddy. Nature delivered. I had won the lottery. You see that same overthinking, overanalyzing, and very imaginative brain of mine that can sway towards the dark, given the wrong circumstances, can sway toward the light, given the right circumstances. A pendulum of feelings and emotions. High highs and low lows. Keeps my life interesting and me on my toes. On my way home, the pendulum was in a full upward swing, calculating an exciting and delusional plan. I go back, I dig deeper and around the rock to, of course, uncover incredibly valuable crystals. I'd haul them home, clean them up, find a respected dealer, and start my crystal empire. I had big dreams for what I called Crystal City, especially big considering I knew almost nothing about the value of gems and minerals. But all logic was off the table. I was blinded by wonder and excitement. A part of me wanted to tell everyone I knew, but as any lottery winner knows, keep it a secret as long as possible. Iron out all the kinks first. And I liked the idea that I had this thing that was all mine. I really had this secret. And they wouldn't get it either. I had just turned 40. I was going to go out and dig for rocks, not knowing if they were valuable. Is she out of her mind? Yes. I think I was. And I think that's exactly where I needed to be at that time. So, the following day, excavation began. I waited for my husband to leave for work before I packed up all my tools, a pickaxe, a digging bar, which is big, a shovel, trowel, gloves. And I really mean this. I never planned on spending so much time there. Maybe a few hours for a couple days. But for 1 month, I went there most days and for most daylight hours. And when I wasn't in Crystal City or digging or cleaning the rocks, I was just dreaming of their potential. I fell in love with them all. I talked to them. I told them how beautiful and pointy they were. I told them I was grateful for their existence. Each was so unique and special for its own specific qualities, and some I even named. While I was there, I was so focused and present. I'd be in Crystal City for hours, only noticing the time passing with the shifting sunlight, not even realizing my numbing fingers and the holes in my gloves, not minding the dirt caked under my nails. Hours would go by without a thought of food or water. I was so happily in my own world there. And by the end of the month, I had dug a coffin-sized hole, easily 3 feet deep, and probably 2 feet wide, and at least 7 feet long. And I learned a lot by trial and error, and I became one with the forest and a real opportunist. After scratching several crystals using metal tools, I decided to switch to tools I found in nature, like bones from a dead cow and sticks. Mostly, though, I dug by hand. I wore through numerous gloves, usually not noticing I was down to my numbing fingers until the red dirt was fully caked under my ragged nails. But in the end, it was mostly my body before my mind or any good sense that told me I needed to take a break. And with my arthritic-like hands and a constant dull pain in my right elbow, I reluctantly hiked my tools out of the woods. If it weren't for the pain, I actually wonder how much longer I would have gone on. oh yeah, and there was a problem with space. You see, the crystals had taken over. They were almost everywhere in my house and outside. In my desk, my bookcases, inside benches, houseplants. I even put some in the crawl space. In an especially bold moment, I asked my husband if he would consolidate his prized bourbon collection so I could have another shelf for my crystals in the liquor closet. He reluctantly obliged, and I felt the marital tension for days. But it was totally worth it to see my crystals under the overhead light. It's just so beautiful. Well, before this, I never really collected anything. That's what I'm calling it, collecting. But who puts their collections in the crawl space? This collecting was teetering on the edge of hoarding. The problem, too, is that I couldn't imagine getting rid of a single one. They each meant something to me. My attachment to them reminded me of this show about hoarding. In this particular episode, this man hoarded rats. He easily had 2,000 of them, and they had taken over his house, literally. Literally, they had taken over his house. He was sleeping in the garage. And he'd come inside his home and throw a heaping bucket full of dog food in the middle of the once dining room floor. And the rats would come out of every nook and cranny, and they would go nuts. And the man would just sit back and look at what he created with pure adoration. So with his house almost condemned and presenting a fire hazard with the gnawed wires and the walls filled with rats' nests, an intervention or eviction was inevitable. And the interventionist said, you have to choose just one rat. Well, of course he got irate and began crying. But I could get it. I got it. I could relate. If crystals were rats, I'd be him. I'd be going down in flames, crystals clutched in locked fists. In retrospect, it may have made sense to get a good idea of the value of the crystals before spending so much time and energy. But like any real passion, reasoning was out of the question. Eventually, though, I decided to put myself out there and my crystals to a professional, a real geologist. I brought 3 of my best specimens to Excalibur Minerals in Charlottesville, Virginia. Walking into that shop was like walking into a museum. I was greeted by the owner, Tony, a geologist, mineral enthusiast, and encyclopedia of knowledge. He even has a mineral named after him. Crazy. I tried to play it cool as I told my story and wasted no time asking too many questions. And sensing my excitement, or maybe trying to take a break from all my questions, Tony also showed me the back of the shop, which has over 200,000 minerals. They're all very neatly cataloged. One of the largest collections on the East Coast. I was in awe. And as I looked around at the knee-high amethyst geodes and all the shelves of sparkling gems, I almost didn't ask what my crystals would be worth. I wondered if I was better left in the dark. I did, though. I asked. And as it turns out, they're actually not worth that much. Some probably nothing. Actually, most are probably not worth anything. And in an attempt to maybe soften the blow, Tony said they were relatively rare from where they were found. But in some minds, as he held up my second best crystal, they would probably just throw this right back. I know, it's so hard. And you would have thought I would have been really distraught by this news. I mean, I was upset, but I wasn't like crying or anything. And then Tony had a way of encouraging me, like almost dismissing the fact that their value was relatively insignificant. I think he could sense my passion. I think he didn't want to squander that. But I also think he sincerely understood. I didn't feel judged or dismissed. If anything, I felt validated, like this kind of enthusiasm was par for the course in rock and mineral collecting. And after almost an hour, I packed up my crystals, and on my way out, Tony's parting words were, "Keep digging." And I still go back to Crystal City on occasion. And although some of the novelty has worn off, it still brings me joy. I feel indebted to it in many ways. And as I've gotten back into a more traditional routine, I can still find myself drifting off there in my head. I believe that taking that shortcut through the scrubbier part of the forest must have been sent from the universe. Finding that rock was one of the best things that happened to me. Breaking from the norm, not necessarily making sense, and doing something I was so wholesomely attracted to felt right. It did not bring me fame or fortune, but made me feel like a child. And once I found that childlike excitement, I got something back. To me, the crystals are invaluable, an unembarrassed passion and testament to my strength. I needed something to unstick me, and it worked. I dug myself out of a hole.
You are out there, aren't you? Thank you for coming. It's 1952, and I am 9 years old, living in Villanova, Pennsylvania, a stylish mainline suburb just outside Philadelphia. It's dark out, and I'm in my bed, covers pulled around my head, and I'm totally connected to radio shows. The Shadow. Surely this crowd must remember The Shadow. Who knows what evils lurk in the hearts of mine? The Shadow knows. And the Lone Ranger, and the Green Hornet, and of course the Phillies. Radio carried me off from reality. Radio allowed me to escape. And yet, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the noise from downstairs. Loud, mean, my parents arguing with each other. Not just arguing, but screaming passionately about whatever. The noise overwhelming Lamont Cranston and Jack Benny. I didn't know then what it was all about, but it was harsh and it was vicious. I could not understand it. I did not like it. And yes, I cried in my pillow. 9 years old, not quite ready for the real world. Not the world of adults. Later, I learned it was all about my father, a national squash champion, been profiled in the New Yorker, an investment type, who years later was run out of town for misusing other people's money. Stealing, I guess you might say. A brilliant and charming man, sadly living with one big character flaw. He ended up in, of all places, Grundy, Virginia, the heart of Virginia's coal country, managing a coal mine, for heaven's sake. Not exactly the Philadelphia Country Club where he started. You know, I've never told that story to anyone before. That 9-year-old little boy stayed with me. I couldn't stand the harshness of language, the bitterness. For years, I ran away from confrontation. Being direct with people was not my style. Perhaps this led to my painful shyness and lack of confidence. Unsure of myself. Not the John Fox Sullivan we have come to know, you might say. Only the other day, I told Annie Williams at Mountainside that I'd been painfully shy as a young man, and in her wonderful, laughing, throaty voice said, "You surely have outgrown that problem." My teenage years were spent in Philadelphia. What an insular society in the 1960s. People set in their ways. How many syllables in your last name? How many generations? What clubs did you belong to? My God, going to Princeton was the pinnacle for many of their best years of their life. Everyone was so comfortable. Having Jewish friends was frowned upon. And as for blacks, well, maybe okay as baseball players. An island of unreality where there was no confrontation because everybody was so similar. An all too easy life, I thought. My Washington, D.C. life, my home for 40 years, was not far in miles from Philadelphia, but at the other end of the spectrum in terms of tone and values. A town marked by cold-blooded ambition. What can you do for me? No one cared what college you went to or what family pedigree, but rather, what's your job? How can you help me? How can we help each other?
an almost slavish worship of power at every level. My profession, magazine publisher. You remember what magazines were? I ran National Journal, Government Executive, The Hotline, Congress Daily, all quite important inside the publications in their day, the 80s and 90s. Later, I published The Atlantic. People paid attention. They took my calls. I called them. They called me. Sometimes to encourage story ideas or to compliment. But sometimes to call to pressure and arm twist. There was a time when a man named Dwayne Andreas, CEO of Archer's Daniel Midland, a global grain dealer. Now, he was a real power player. He gave money to all politicians on each side. He befriended major media stars. The man knew his way around a speed dial. Turned out he didn't like a series of articles detailing his questionable activities that we'd published in National Journal. And through a mutual lobbyist friend, he asked me for lunch at his Lux Suite in the Hay Adams Hotel overlooking the White House. I'm in my late 30s and frankly kind of flattered that he cared enough about what we wrote and recognized the importance of our audience. Well, at first he flattered. That was nice. Then he tried to impress. And then lastly, threatened. He did his best to make me feel small and inconsequential. Confrontation again. Confrontation in the workplace that now takes on a cold-bloodedness all its own because it comes with consequences. Careers are made or broken. How would I respond? As he spoke, my mind seized up as I tried to put together an exit strategy, one where I could hold firm, politely, but not lose my job. He told me about how if he had a problem in Germany, he was a grain dealer. If he had a problem in Germany, he would just call Chancellor Helmut Kohl. If Russia, Gorbachev. If in D.C., he'd call the White House or Bob Dole on the Hill. I kid you not, this is who he dealt with. Now, he was telling me to solve a problem. He reminded me that he was spending $250,000 a year advertising in National Journal and wondered whether that was a good investment, given the nature of our coverage of him. Not money well spent, he says. Well, it turns out he didn't like my response. Did not like that I refused to silence one of our writers for doing his job, and indeed doing it quite well. My super lobbyist friend who was present just rolled his eyes, suggesting I was crazy, an idiot. But $250,000 was really big dollars in those days, and we were always financially insecure. Well, the advertising quickly disappeared. P.S., by the way, Andreas was later investigated for illegal campaign contributions and his company charged with price fixing. Though I purposely avoided confrontation as I spent more and more time in Washington, I learned the skill of ingratiation, a necessary Washington skill, and I learned with the best of them. One Saturday night, I was in the VIP reception room at the Hilton Hotel for the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner. President George Bush was there, and I got talking with him about how we'd gone to Yale together in the 60s. He asked if we'd known each other, and I responded, well, not really. But we'd most likely shared many drinks together as our adjacent fraternities often partied late into the night. Lots of drinking, lots of late nights. Bush, knowing I was a journalist type and instinctively not trusting our breed, immediately pulled back, nervous that I might have information to share about his youthful indiscretions. I was jerking him around, actually. Having successfully gotten his attention, I took one big swallow of wine, put my hand on his shoulder, leaned over, and whispered in his ear, Don't worry, Mr. President, I don't remember a fucking thing. Bush, visibly relieved and loving locker room humor, which I knew, yelled over to his wife, Laura, pointed at me with a big smile on his face and a shitting grin, and gave me the thumbs up of Yale approval. Bulldog, bulldog. Oh, yes, I could do ingratiation, indeed, suck up with the best of them. And I could practice capitulation as well as ingratiation. Give in when it seemed the wiser course, especially when the emotional stakes were high, especially when it's giving in to your wife. As many of you know, my wife Beverly traveled to Haiti more than 20 times to collect Haitian art for resale in the United States. The purpose was to raise money for 7 eye clinics. In the process, we developed our own collection. The cause was good. I got to like Haitian art. I went to Haiti myself on several occasions. But yikes, the stuff was all over the place in our Georgetown house. Boxes, crates, shipping material. She was always organizing a show in Washington or New York City or California. Lots of schlepping around. I attempted to be the ever-loving and supportive partner. But truth be told, I probably was both patronizing and dismissive. Typical husband. I mean, who really cares about Haitian art? Barely tolerating one's spouse's passion, wasn't it all just sort of 2 small potatoes? One day I complained about how there was so much art and stuff on the floor resting against the wall. What a mess, I said. And the walls were filled floor to ceiling. Well, she liked the look of walls filled floor to ceiling with paintings. She smiled, gave me a very loving and, or frankly, dismissive look, and said, "It's all very French, very French." Well, I folded. In my view, very French suggested stylish, very cool. So we still have art piled on the floors and the walls in our house here in Washington. Fast forward to just past year when some of our art was displayed on the walls of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. I felt very proud of Beverly. Sadly, she was no longer with us to see the National Gallery's recognition of her and her life's work. I guess she knew what she was doing all along. Now, as I got older, I came to believe confrontation could be diffused by explanation. Wasn't it possible to persuade one's interlocutors, oneself for that matter, out of all sorts of trouble? Win over the hearts and minds of men. As mayor, I inherited my predecessor, Gene Leggett's passion for putting in a new sewer system in town. There are obvious benefits, but signing up residents also meant each household would need to make a sizable capital contribution, like a lot of money. I spent weeks pounding the streets, knocking on doors, talking waste, septic tanks, grinder pumps, sewers, water. Tried to avoid turning up on people's doorsteps right at dinner. Most residents signed up, but some held out. Some even closed their doors on me forcefully. One guy said he'd have a shotgun when he showed up on his front garden to dig up the grinder pothole. And just to make sure my points were having maximum impact, I would rehearse my explanation over and over again at the dinner table with Beverly. Now, I didn't get every household to sign on, but I did avoid any real confrontation. The town voted in favor, and when I came up for re-election, I am pleased to say that I got every vote in town, bar one. I always suspected that no vote came from very close to home. Perhaps I wasn't the great explainer after all. Then there was a time in our beloved Rappahannock when I did not run away from confrontation. Indeed, I tried conflagration, surprised and frightened myself as to how easily I took to it. It's a Saturday morning, and I'm hanging out with the usual group of locals at the Quickie Mart. One of them has always endorsed me as sort of an okay fellow for a come here, welcoming me to the group. I was allowed to drink coffee with the boys and shoot the shit. Almost just tolerated, like just one of the guys, well, sort of. One day, Steve Kreiser, as local and been here as they come, took me to task on some development in town which made him unhappy, like really unhappy. Well, I'm mayor and I know Steve pretty well. I like him, great guy. Steve played the bearded, very big and tough, sort of raging bull type very well. Well, he challenged my integrity. He called me a liar, and I simply lost it. I tend to think highly of my integrity. In seconds, confrontation became big-time conflagration. We started screaming at each other, face to face, closer and closer, each ready, I kid you not, ready to take a swing. And he was big. The other boys backed off, not wanting to get in the middle of it. Nothing like a good Saturday morning fight at the Quickie Mart. Watching the 75-year-old mayor get beaten into a pulp. I'm so mad I really lost it. But I did not back down. Raw emotion, overwhelming common sense. What an idiot I was, just ready to go with this guy. At the very last moment, face to face, both of us out of control, fist curled, it just stopped. We pulled back. It was over. I got in the car shaking, wondering how and why did I lose it. Went home with the papers, and when asked by Beverly how was my morning newspaper run, I said, fine. Just the usual chat with the boys. I just couldn't tell her the truth. Never did like confrontation, because deep down I knew that once I started, I might not stop. Turns out I was ready to throw a punch with the best of them. Maybe I was much more Grundy, Virginia than Philadelphia Country Club. But life does move on. We do address our strengths and weaknesses. Over time, we hone strategies and tactics to deal with our demons. And I have learned how to deal with mine. Who knew technology would come to the rescue? After years of resisting, and thanks to the insistence of friends, I found myself recently in Costco with several others of the hearing impaired demographic. So if you choose to confront me, I know just how to deal with you. No more scared little boy crying into his pillow. No more prize fighter at the Quickie Mart. Nah. Today I have a much better, simpler solution to make each and every confrontation go away. Just disappear. Puff. And leave me in the serene beauty of peace and quiet and harmony. Who knew that finally, at 81, it could be so simple? Whoa! Thank you all.
Good. Okay, let's get started. Thanks for staying a few extra minutes. I'm Ed Dolnick. I'm one of the coaches who works with the storytellers. Now that their hard work is done, they volunteered to stay a bit and take us behind the scenes. But first, I want to take a minute to celebrate. It's a bold thing to come on stage and tell a story about your personal life to a big crowd like this. So let's have one more round of applause for our storytellers. As Sally told you, this is the 28th year of No Ordinary Person. But what she didn't tell you is that she's been there from the beginning, and for a long, long while, Sally's been the guiding spirit of No Ordinary Person. It only happens because of her. Over the years, there have been dozens and dozens of storytellers, dozens and dozens of people tutored in this way, lots of community, all on account of Sally. So one more round of applause for her. And the coaches who work with her are Dick Raines and Lynn Dolnick. They deserve a hand too. This talkback has two purposes. One is to celebrate our storytellers, but just as important, it's to try to lure some of you out in the audience to think about if you might tell a story up here sometime. I hope you'll think about it. And I want to talk about stories for just a minute, because I've heard from some people that they've misunderstood what No Ordinary Person means. They had taken the title to mean that unless you're extraordinary, you shouldn't tell a story. So if you have founded a company, or if you have rowed a bathtub across the Atlantic or something like that, then maybe you would be marvelous enough to qualify. But that's not it at all. That's actually the opposite of what we have in mind. The point of No Ordinary Person as a title is that there is no such thing as someone who is just an ordinary person. Everybody has been knocked around by the world, has learned a lot, has seen a lot, has changed their mind about one thing or another. Everybody has some story to tell, and sharing that story is probably good for them and good for all of us. So I would encourage you, if you're in the least inclined, to think about telling a story. And if that's at all tempting, tell me or Lynn or Sally or Dick, or go to the Raac website and leave a note, and we'll be able to continue this tradition beyond its 28 years. So now let's get to our storytellers. I want to start with John. John, you talked about your father ever so briefly. I imagine there's more to that story.
That could be another performance. I'm glad you asked. It's sort of a loose end in the story. I'll just simply answer this way. He ran this coal mine in Grundy. It went bust. And for whatever set of reasons, he ended up managing the Maryland Inn in Annapolis, Maryland. And at the time, for 10 years. And the time he died, he received letters of tribute from both senators of Maryland and the vice president. Don't tell anyone it was Spiro, I knew it. But he turned his life around and was a giant success and a great man. I loved him dearly.
Let's do this. I'm going to ask everyone the same question, and then we'll open it up to questions for you. Dick has a microphone. If you raise your hand, he can run to you and give you that mic. But my question for each of you, and we'll work down the line, we'll start with Philip, is just what this storytelling experience was like. Was it fun? Was it an ordeal? Were there any surprises along the way? And in particular, if someone says to you, I'm thinking of this, is this a good idea? I'm curious to know what you would say to them.
Well, it's definitely a good idea. As you alluded earlier, everybody has a story. And all you have to do is stand here. You've got a captive, friendly audience here, and you just tell the story. And as you say, it doesn't have to be heroic or any of those different connotations. It's about being honest about what happened. And that's always a good thing to look back on and recognize and think about. So I couldn't say it was fun, but it wasn't an ordeal. But I didn't have expectations either way. It was quite gratifying to write something out and then have professional coaching, in my case from Ed and Sally, who found most of it acceptable. And that was definitely a pleasant surprise. So I go ahead and submit a story.
Let's all take on the same question, and we'll just move one after the other.
Okay, I was in the seats last year. I've been as many times as I have been in the past to hear all these great stories. And I knew last year that I wanted to contribute. So I'm grateful. I enjoyed all those stories last year and the year before that when we could. So it is possible, if you have a story on your heart that you're longing to share or not. My story, I have to say, kind of came through in a quick month or so, as I'm fortunate enough to have, by default, jumped in where someone couldn't be here. So I had the script and didn't have enough time to commit to memory. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But otherwise, that was comforting to have the script. And I know that following him without a script, and we all talked about it, and I was like, whew, you guys are going to have a script. So it was comforting to know, even though we were familiar with our stories. And now we've done our dress rehearsal. So Sunday, come back and see it again. It'll be even different, more excitement. But yes, I encourage you to think about it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, I am not an actual performer or public speaker. I met Dick at a cocktail party, and he asked me to send him a story, and I actually had one because when I went to meet Tony at Excalibur Minerals, I sent a follow-up email, and he was like, oh, you seem so, he knew I was enthusiastic, but he was like, you seem so enthusiastic. Why don't you write a little, article for my mineral news? And so I did, and that's what I sent Dick, and Dick was so encouraging. He's like, oh, you just got to tell this story. And at first I sent him other people's names. I was like, oh, this guy would be better, I think. But he was so encouraging and really made me feel comfortable. And it was definitely a group effort. I consulted a lot of friends and family. And God, I feel so sorry for some of my friends who've listened to my story so many times. But anyway, I am really glad I did this. I truly am. I really am. This has certainly been a growing experience. And I think this is a valuable thing to have in the community.
I said yes to doing this without having any idea what I would talk about. And it was months I couldn't figure out what to talk about. I tried some ideas and yeah. And my good friend Caroline Anstey, who was the star last year, I sort of rambled off on this thing about when I was a little boy. And she said, that's your story. I said, I can't tell that story to people. It's none of their fucking business. And, but it sort of led to one thing to another. And the actual process, it's better not to know what you wanted to say. The actual process of sort of thinking through how to do it and getting the advice, it's been said multiple times, but the advice of these, Sally and Ed and Dick and everybody, Lynn, is just really important. And so if any of you do it, welcome it, embrace it. And we are so much better now than we were at the first rehearsal. So it's a great personal advancement, worth doing.
If anyone has questions, any sort of questions, let's try that.
Where's one? Oh. Here, take this.
So where's Crystal City?
Don't tell her.
Northern Virginia.
There you go. That's right.
It's in Rappahannock. God, on the family farm. So, sort of a secret.
So, Lily, what have you done with all those crystals, especially the ones under the house?
Oh, well, they're actually still there. And I sometimes just open up the liquor closet and I just stare at the ones there. Those are like my best specimens. And I mean, I don't know. I haven't really, I really maybe have a hoarding problem. They are, occasionally I'll give some away to for gifts and things, I get mixed reactions, but largely the positive. So, and I really do, I know it was different and unusual and not like a normal thing, but it did take me out of something, which I think was really important. And it talk about vulnerable, this is something I kept from everyone for so long. And then I literally just told this story here. But it was it was one of the best things that happened to me. And I don't care that it was weird.
I believe we've come to the end of the evening. Is that? Whoops, almost to the end.
Hi. I talked to a number of you before you started, and you seemed so relaxed. I was really quite blown away. My fear would be dealing with performance anxiety. Did any of you have performance anxiety, and how did you deal with it?
That's a good question.
Who wants to take that?
I had friends that give me Xanax. I didn't take the Xanax. I almost had a panic attack before this, so no. I thought I was having a little heart palpitations. Anyway, but I exercised. I ran 5 miles. Not earlier today. I did what I could. Had a little bit of wine, but long.
So let's end on that note of it, with that endorsement of a drug regime. Let's send our storytellers off with one final round of applause and march them home.
Here's one back. There you go.
Thank you.